Hello there, I'm Chris Oldland, Editor-in-Chief of Field Service News. We recently ran a fantastic webinar with the team at IFS that was looking at why, despite the big stories in field service technology being all centered around exciting topics such as IoT, big data, augmented reality and so on and so forth, scheduling and optimized scheduling should remain at the forefront of any field service management investment in technology across 2016. We had a fantastic presentation in the webinar by Daryl, Dudey, an expert in scheduling that works with IFS, and here is a selection of the very interactive Q&A that we had towards the end of the session. Now if you'd like to download the full webinar, you can do so by just clicking the link below and filling a brief form, and you'll be given access to download the webinar instantly. Anyway, let's have a look at some of the questions that we had and Daryl's responses. A question here from our audience. What's a typical time from modelling to pilot to rollout? Is there a generic kind of time frame there?
That's a really good question, and it ultimately decides several things that affect that. How driven that particular business is, and I guess to an extent how large the organisation is. If we're dealing with smaller teams, we can roll out a bit quicker. So we could even be talking weeks from pilot through to live. If it's an organisation with a couple of thousand people out in the field, generally speaking, we want to take a little longer over that and make sure that we are not doing it right, but that we are considering all the factors in that. We try to go for a timescale of 6 months from start of project through to live. I mean, that's the goal.
Sure.
If possible. But and like I said, the nature of the business, the more that upper management is driving this project, the more likely it is we're going to get to live quicker. It's very important because inevitably, unlike a lot of the time these things get done as IT projects, but they're not. They're business projects, and the business needs to understand that there's a lot of change involved in this. We've got people involved in this. We've got customers involved. And everybody really needs to be concentrating on it and focusing on it to get the result that everybody wants.
In your experience, you mentioned you worked in the implementation team when you first started with IFS, and I'm sure you've seen a number of implementations in your time. Those companies that have been driven from the top, and it's been viewed as a business move rather than an IT move, as you describe it. Has there been? Is it a very marked difference between the two? Is it very much that those companies that have the full buy-in from board level get more out of this kind of implementation?
Absolutely, yeah. And the ones that have got that buy-in, have got that drive, they're the ones that see the significant improvements to their business. They're the ones that see big numbers in reduction in travel, increase in jobs per day. They're the ones that see the most success, because also we get, as I mentioned earlier about the manual overriding, in a company that decides that they're not going to override the system, they're not diluting the benefits. So they're setting those kind of rules down, and as a result, it works much better for them. And in the end, what I know from experience is those businesses that drive it better is the people out in the field, and the dispatchers end up liking the system more anyway, because they get the benefits out of it that they were expecting.
So is it both ends, you'd say, as well as being driven by the need to be driven by the top level, also an important case for involving the end users, the guys out in the field throughout the implementation process, to make sure you get their buy-in as well. So it's kind of from both ends of the spectrum. There's a big change management piece, yeah.
Absolutely, and involving the technicians and their team leaders and dispatchers is absolutely key, really, because at the end of the day, this can be seen as a bit of an invasive system coming in and changing working practices, taking responsibilities away from people. So we need to manage it in the right way to keep those people on board. And in the end, people end up doing what they're better at. So if you've got dispatchers, rather than deciding which sequence of jobs to do, in which order, they're doing what they're better at, which is contacting customers and dealing with the technicians and making sure everything's running smoothly. The same with the technicians. They're doing what they're best at, which is being on site, fixing equipment, and interacting with customers, not deciding on a route for the day, etc. So everybody benefits, in my opinion.
Okay. I've got a question here from Martin Green, who's part of our audience. He wants to know what the typical ROI is following implementation.
It can vary. So scheduling as a project is a very definite return on investment project. So most companies can expect to see 5 to 15% increase in productivity and SLA hit rates. So that all improves the bottom line. Every organization's got different priorities, of course, so they tend to tune it in a different way. Fuel savings are a particularly direct way of measuring cost savings. PHS in the UK, for example, made fuel savings of around 7 to 8% a year, which is about £2 million. So it's out there on the internet. If you Google PHS, £2 million, an IFS, you'll come up with a link. So they made some significant savings. That was quite a lot more than they paid for the solution, I might add. So the solution paid for itself pretty quickly.
Yeah, I
But
mean,
actually,
sorry, carry
yeah,
on.
I'll say actually the scheduling health check I covered in one of the slides is a great way of doing that because that's a good way of putting that business case together. So we can take customer data if they're unsure, send us the data, we can run that through and give you some predicted numbers, and that helps as a put a solid base into any business case really.
Perhaps, Daryl, you could go back one slide so we've got that. So anyone
That's
listening can see the, because I think there's a link there, isn't there, for
yeah.
companies to visit. Talking about the financial gains, how it's obviously going to be one of the big tools that you would use when building a case for going to the board cap in hand and saying, guys, we really need to implement this. I mean, how would you recommend your service director goes to the board if he's, because all too often we hear that service doesn't get the voice it perhaps should in certain
hmm
industries at board level. How would you recommend going to the board and saying, look, we really need this if we're going to compete?
Well, simple cases are put forward before that the numbers make a pretty good case in themselves. So increasing jobs per day, fuel reductions, etc. They're all pretty big numbers. There aren't many projects that you can implement that are going to give you significant savings like that. But there are other sort of more intangible benefits as well, such as customer satisfaction. So a lot of organizations with using manual systems or some kind of assistance systems can end up sending the wrong technician out, maybe he's missing parts, and that just creates frustration at the customers really. So sending the right person, right skills, right parts, arriving within the agreed time window, that is pretty important. And also, a possibility with increased efficiency is maybe offering shorter appointment windows. So that's giving a competitive advantage. If your competitors are all offering AM, PM, and you've got the ability to offer 1 hour or 2 hour slots, that's a pretty compelling case, I think, for scheduling and optimization.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when we're looking at ever increasing pressure to have ever more efficient SLAs, should we say, in the business to business world, and of course, important appointment times in the business consumer world. I mean, this kind of scheduling, it's kind of fundamental, isn't it, to being able to not only meet the SLAs that you're offering your customers, but also make sure those SLAs are perhaps more competitive than any of your peers.
Oh, exactly. And the reality is from my experience in a lot of organizations, they may actually have SLAs in place with their customers, but they're not always necessarily meeting them. And it's quite interesting when we do that first phase, is we take some historical data, is we discover some huge discrepancies from what they think they're doing to what they're actually doing. I mean, I know that those organizations obviously have to do their own kind of bookkeeping, figure out the numbers, but when we put them in, it turns out they could be only hitting 60% of their SLAs or whatever. So they've given a commitment to their customer and then nowhere near achieving it. And the reason being is when you're using a manual system or a semi-manual system, it's pretty hard to consider all the variables. You've got to consider where the technicians are,
Yeah.
what jobs are nearby, what parts and skills are required on those jobs, when you need to get there. It's just too much for a person to deal with in reality. So they just let things slip. So so an organization that takes on an optimized solution, not only are they going to hit the SLAs that they've already guaranteed to their customers, but they
Mm.
have the possibility then of offering shorter SLAs. So everybody else, your peer competitors, are all offering 4 hour SLAs or going with 2 hour SLAs. They won't be able to do it. They won't be able to keep up with that.
And that's all we have time for, unfortunately, in this very short sample of our recent webinar. However, you can access the full webinar, including Daryl's excellent presentation and the full Q&A between myself and Daryl and the audience. So if you'd like to hear more about the optimized scheduling and why you should be paying attention to it in your field service management technologies next year, then do click the link below, fill out the brief form, and you will receive instant access to this webinar. But for now, thank you very much, as always, for tuning in. My name is Chris Holdland. I'm Editor-in-Chief of Field Service News, and we'll see you again soon. Take care.